John, it's all yours, buddy.
Okay, thank you. Really quickly, as far as announcements, again, we'd like to remind everyone that you are all invited, every individual, to participate in the fall conference. Even if you aren't going to be there, you are more than welcome to create a display or a video, anything that you feel comfortable presenting that would assist basically in sparking interest in people to look at different subjects and move forward in researching them and becoming masters in whatever subject they desire. And so please, this is for everybody. And Melody has assured us that there will be plenty of room for all displays, whether they just be posters, videos, whatever they may be. So please remember that. I'm hitting enter right now on the chat thing, so that everybody can see. The name and the phone number is for Colby Hunt. He's a good friend. He has a huge overabundance of bulls, and he doesn't want their pasture raised, as far as I understand. He doesn't want to have to buy feed for them. And because all of the processing plants are backed up, he can't get kill dates. So he contacted us this week and said that he'd be willing to sell his bulls for $2.50 a pound hanging weight. So if anyone is interested, that is his name and his number. You can call and talk to him about the particulars. And then I will turn time over now to Angela.
Okay, perfect. So I need to share my screen. So can you?
You should be good to go on that, Angela.
Okay, perfect. Okay, all right. Okay. Share. Okay, so do you see two pages there? There's says ceramic gravity water filter, and the other one is grains beans from 1000 Springs Mill.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is an opportunity that we have through Jennifer Willis. She is able to buy things at wholesale, and she has a website. I'm going to go ahead and open it right here. Whoops, come on. Open hyperlink. Okay, so this is her website. She sells things on there, but in particular, we're going to look at this gravity water. It's a purification kit. And she is going to let us buy at her cost. And so these are $46. Can you see my little finger right here?
Yes.
Okay, so if you look right here, it's a 3-piece set. It's normally $46. I'm going to go back to my. Okay, I'm going to go back over here. So the website price is $46. She said that she can give those to us for $26 per unit, but we have to buy a case of 30. And then she said that these will last like a family of 4 for about a year, and it's really good water. She also owns the Berkey filtration system. I also own the Berkey and absolutely love it. It costs quite a bit, but she says this is comparable to it. Not exactly. I mean, you don't get the beautiful, nice stainless steel container and everything. You make your own just with buckets, jugs of, just your own bucket. And she says it compares to it. So the whole kit would be the $26 per unit, and the just the actual filter, the ceramic filter, it would be $21. So she was thinking, you really don't need the little spigot and little filter, the little sack that goes over the filter. So if you were to just buy one and then a couple of the other just ceramic filter, it would be $5 cheaper. So she just wanted to, you know, put that out to you, all the fellowships or anyone that wants to buy. So you could just get in contact with either Jennifer Willis or myself. So there's that opportunity. And then also her website is really great, has a whole bunch of different things on there. The other one is Grains and Beans from 1000 Springs Mill. And I'm going to open that. So this is a place in Buell, Idaho. It's just right outside of Twin Falls. I did a great big order. This is what their bags look like. Oh, you kind of see me in the little box over there. These are their bags. They're really nice. They have a nice little handle on them. They are organic. Everything that is grown there. The Lohmeyers, Sarah and Matt both went and had a tour of the whole property. Anyways, Jim and I have been bagging beans and things like that for storage and putting them in our Bumblebee bins, but great resource. If you look through there, the products, so let's just go organic black beans. If you look, the big bags are a 25-pound bag. They're $72. With a wholesale order, you can get those at half off, give or take, you know, a dollar or two, which is a really good price for 100% organic beans. And they have brown rice. They don't have white rice. They have corn, just lots of different things. But you have to have a 2,000-pound order. So if you want to gather a lot of people, so these two opportunities are basically if you want to get together with your fellowship and order. But I'm pretty happy with it. And if you know Sarah Lohmeyer and Matt, they are very healthy conscious. And so if they approve of something, it's really good quality. So anyways, those are the two opportunities, and we'll probably put that on the website so that people can look into it further.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, thank you. We'll turn the time over to Karen.
Okay, help to unmute me. All right, so just a tiny bit about me. I'm a master gardener, so they say. And I took the classes and been gardening for about 20 years, give or take. I specialize in food. So ornamentals, not as much, but I really am passionate about growing food that people can eat and that you can store. We eat seasonally here, so my whole family is extremely tired of things like kale and squash, and we're really excited about strawberries. So I'm more of an intuitive gardener because there's a lot of rules to gardening, but a lot of it, if you understand the principles, then you can apply it to many situations. A great example is called phenology. And that's when you look at nature to figure out things like what to plant when. Otherwise, you can have frost dates, which is one way you know when to plant. But those vary. I mean, every year, I don't know about where you live, but a frost date can be 3 or 4 weeks in any direction where we are. Another way you can know when to plant is to take the temperature of the soil. But that also, you might have 2 really warm, sunny days, and your soil temperature will rise, but then, it get really cold and hail and be miserable. And so looking to nature to know when to plant is a lot safer. Not to say that, like last spring, we had a freak late frost that ruined half the apple harvest for the people in town. So sometimes, there's always going to be surprises. But so phenology, just to give you an example, when lilacs first leaf out, or when the dandelions are in full bloom, that's when you plant beets, broccoli, carrots, cabbage, lettuce, spinach, potatoes, peas, the things that can tolerate a little bit more cold, and it's safe to plant those. By the time lilacs are in full bloom, then you can plant the tender annuals. So it's looking, and if you look up phenology, there's a lot of different things, indicators. Some are, you can use forsythia, you can use different plants, but it's looking at nature to see what's blooming naturally to know when to do certain things in the garden. Phenology can also apply to pest management. So they say, apple maggot moss peak when the Canada thistle blooms, things like that. And the beauty about phenology, it doesn't matter if you're in Utah or Idaho or Kentucky, because, we all have dandelions. Most of us, have lilacs, or we have them around us in our neighborhood, even if we don't have them ourselves. So the reason I like that is just makes things simple for everyone. And once you just learn a couple rules, you never have to worry about frost dates. You never have to worry about soil temperatures and things like that. Anyway, so what I find most with people is their failures are due to several factors. The first one is actually lack of nutrition. Most people don't give their soil enough nutrients to produce really healthy plants. And if the plants aren't healthy, then they're going to be more prone to disease. They'll be less drought tolerant. You might have certain weeds and much more pests. So the first most important thing is to make sure that you're super healthy soil. And so I don't even think about fertilizing my plants. I just make sure that my soil is as healthy as I can possibly make it. And then I don't have to worry about fertilizing, my individual plants. There are times when you can follow your feed and things like that. But for instance, I make my own potting soil. Potting soil, by the way, has very little nutrients in it. And if a lot of times people will start their little seeds, and so the first set of leaves are little cotyledon leaves. And then when they start to develop, and those cotyledon leaves have nutrients in it that, that is drawn from the seed, and it's to get enough nutrition in that little plant to send down roots and to put out some leaves where it can start photosynthesizing and getting nutrition other ways. Well, if there's no nutrition in the soil, when it sends down those little roots, it just sort of stops growing, it withers, it dies, it looks terrible. And for a lot of people, they start little things in trays, and it all starts out great. And then it really starts to slack off, and they stop growing, or they look pitiful. And that is almost always the cause. So my suggestion is when you have potting soil, if you're doing any little starts, make sure you've added in a little bit of organic compost into that potting soil, and preferably some organic fertilizer. If you need recipes, again, email me and I can send you, or you can just Google recipes for potting soil, but make sure there's nutrition in there. And then you don't have to worry about fertilizing that little plant until it's in your ground, in your garden, or somewhere else. And it makes for much healthier starts from the beginning. There's 20 essential nutrients or elements that plants need. And ironically, many of them are the same as what we have. So calcium makes strong bones for us, but calcium is also what helps give plants their structure. And when plants are stressed, like if you want to alleviate transplant shock, you give them B vitamins. Well, when we're stressed, we take B vitamins. So plants use a lot of those same nutrients for some of the same purposes as we do. Everybody knows about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and sometimes there's a fourth one listed, and that's sulfur. And these are the three big ones. But plants need so many more, just like we need more than just like fat, protein, and carbohydrates. If you are able to add to your soils as much variety of elements, minerals, they make essential, or like volcanic ash is one of them, trace minerals. So whatever you can do where you're planting to add in all the trace minerals, it really helps your plants, because they need copper, they need boron, they need a lot of different things. Calcium is really big. It helps prevent the blossom end rot on tomatoes. So knowing you can get your soil tested too, which I highly recommend. There's many places on the internet where you can send soil samples and find out what you already have in your soil. And I do recommend that. To test your well, test your water, and then test your soil. But we'll get to water later. But if you know what you're starting with, then you also know how to amend your soil and make it better. So I think that's good for soil. Water. So that's the second problem. So usually when their gardens are struggling, it's first nutrition. But then second, it's water, and it's 90% of the time not enough water. Watering needs to be, surprisingly, they say that most vegetable gardens need anywhere between 2-3 inches of water every 5 days, and it needs to be slow. And so what happens is we water the surface, but it never sinks down deep enough to get to the roots. And this also happens a lot with little starts. I see people sprinkle their little baby plants, but you can pull the little plant out and it's only wet on like the top inch or two of that little cup, and it never gets to the bottom. So I do all my starts in solo cups because they're clean. I can wash them out really easily. I drill holes in the bottom, and then that way I can slide them out of the solo cup, take a look at the root structure, and that way I know when to plant them. They drain really well, and they're sterile, and they're a nice big size. A lot of times you start plants in these little bitty cells, and there's just not enough room there for that plant to establish a good root system before you need to move it somewhere else. It outgrows that area, and then it's going to be struggling to get enough nutrients and water in that small space. So solo cups. As far as water goes, it's also important to know, like, we have a well, and the pH of our water is an 8, which is very alkaline. So if you're repeatedly watering things like blueberries, then your blueberries aren't going to be very happy because they like acid. So these are things, if you have your well water tested and you know what the pH is, then you also know that you might have to add more acid to your blueberries and hydrangeas or anything else that likes acid. So I do recommend testing it. So as far as watering, there's a lot of diseases that can come by watering the plant. Really, again, it's best to water the soil. Plants do take in moisture from their leaves, and much of that in the form of dew, but they really need it down in their root systems. And if you sprinkle the leaves too much, you can get different types of funguses and bacterial problems. So it's really best, if you have an option, if you can do it, soaker hoses or drip lines give you the best watering. And then you simply need to just take a little hole, dig down, and constantly, check until you've got a good watering system going. Check and see that 6 inches to 12 inches down, it's actually moist down there and not just the top inch or two. And as far as that goes, I'm a big fan of mulches. I use a composted straw most of the time. I use a lot of bark mulch too. I kind of have the back to Eden method is one of my favorites. But if you buy straw in the fall, you let it sit over winter. In the spring, you won't have as much problem with around here we have oat straw. And if you don't compost your straw over the winter, then you'll just be pulling tiny little oat plants out of your garden all summer, which I've done that many times. So I try to remember to buy it in advance. But the straw makes a really nice mulch, especially in our arid, we're arid here, and the soil can dry out really fast. And so having some type of mulch to put down helps that. And it also suppresses weeds, which I will get to in a moment. So the next problem that we usually have is pests. And my husband's navigating, by the way, the chat here, answering questions for me. Pests, and those can be really tiny, like aphids. In fact, today I went around to all of my fruit trees and I put the tape you use when you're painting, like blue tape, a nice wide blue tape, and I wrap it around the sticky side out, and then I paint that with tanglefoot. And what that does is it stops the ants from crawling up the tree and farming aphids in your tree. So if you have any aphid problems, which, I think almost everybody gets aphids in their fruit trees, that is a really great way to stop aphids. So, but most aphids can be sprayed out of your trees or off your plants with just a strong spray of water. I'm an organic gardener, so that's my go-to. If that's not working, that almost always works. But if it doesn't, you can also make just a aphid spray with 1 quart of water and 1 tablespoon of Dawn dish soap. And that works really great for a lot of little like thrips and aphids and creepy crawlies. The other problem I have is you have cutworms. I don't know if you guys have cutworms, but they're really nasty. You plant all these beautiful green beans, they come up and then they're all broken off and gone. That you just put a little toilet paper roll. So when you plant your beans, you slide a little toilet paper roll, or you plant the seed down in the middle and they can come up. You can make a little collar of aluminum foil, but cut a toilet paper roll in half and you can set that down and that helps those. I'm a huge fan of having beneficial nematodes. So I don't know if you've ever heard of those, but you can order them online, and what you're doing is you're inoculating your soil. They help get rid of the bad kind of nematodes, like actually roundworms, like if you have pets and things, or you live in an area with wildlife, the beneficial nematodes will help eliminate some of these soil pests like wireworms and anything that lays their eggs in the soil. So again, if you can make your soil really healthy and happy, then you don't have to worry about constantly treating these problems. If you have caterpillars, which we do, and whether they be the tent caterpillars in your trees, or we have a really bad problem with the cabbage loopers, then you can use BT. It's the Bacillus thuringiensis. I can never say that properly, but we call it BT. And you can order that as well and spray that on. And that works really well to stop anything that chews leaves. Unfortunately, they still have to chew a little bit of the leaf to eat the BT. So there still will be a little bit of damage, but that does a really good job of controlling any kind of leaf eaters and caterpillars. So we also have a lot of the large pests like deer. And for us, deer is a big problem around. You can't even have any kind of garden whatsoever because of the deer. And so for us, a 6.5 foot fence works. For some people, they have to go higher, 8 foot fence, but for us, it's usually about 6 feet. And if you live someplace and you don't want to put a 7-foot fence in, you can put a 5-foot fence in and then just run a wire about every foot, and that will also work. And then it's a little bit more visually appealing. We have a really bad problem with pocket gophers too, this year, and voles. So the voles have a tendency to eat the outside of the bark all the way around the tree and girdle it, and then that just kills it. So that's unfortunate. What I've done in the past that works really well, you can buy hardware mesh, really small holes of hardware mesh, and make a collar around the tree and wrap around the tree. They have a tendency to kind of climb up that and get to the top of the snow and then eat above it. So if you have a source where you can buy, like I buy from Azure Standard, about 2 pounds of the hottest cayenne pepper you can find. And then in the fall, I sprinkle that around each tree, because not only, even if they can't get to the bark, they'll eat the roots. So I found that if I sprinkle blood meal, I mix blood meal and cayenne pepper, and I just sprinkle that around each tree. And then I repeat that again about in January. And because usually the snow melts away just away from the trunk of the tree. And I can just re-sprinkle that there for them. And that really, really helps get rid of them. There's something called a gopher hawk. If you have pocket gophers, they don't usually girdle the trees, but they'll eat the roots. And pocket gophers, they're horrible. But there's the good thing about pocket gophers is they're not too many in an area. So if you have them, and it's usually 1 or 2, and there's something called a gopher hawk. We've had great success with that. I don't know if anybody has rabbits, but if you have rabbits at the bottom of your deer fence, chicken wire works great. You have to put it down a couple inches because they dig, but we don't have rabbits here because we have too many predators. So one more problem that we have is weeds. Weeds are designed to cover space, really. And I mean, to me, it's almost like a scab. When the earth is bare, the weeds are the first ones to come in and they cover the dirt. And so whether it's a godly design or I'm not sure what, but they help preserve the earth. It's like a scab, they're protecting it. And it protects it from erosion. It helps hold the moisture in. And so they have a purpose. Well, if you have conditions that don't make them have to do their job, then you're not going to have weeds. And that is mulch is really the best one. Any kind of anything growing, just don't have bare dirt. Because if you have bare dirt, somehow a weed is going to blow in. They say there's 140 weed seeds per pound of soil, which I'm pretty sure mine has at least that many. And then there's weeds like mullein can have 200,000 seeds in one plant. And a lot of these seeds can live in the soil for decades. So as long as you have bare dirt, you're going to have weeds. If you can, obviously pull them before they go to seed. I mean, I can't get to all my weeds in time, but as long as I get to them before they go to seed, then I don't have to worry about decades more weeds. The composted straw is an excellent weed barrier. Mulch, also like just bark, wood bark is good. There are other pests that like to live in wood bark, so that can be a problem. It's really easy for things to hide in there, but it does help really hold the soil and prevent weeds. Rock, I've used gravel before, and then gravel does a really great job holding moisture in, especially if you live in a cold area. The gravel helps really heat the soil. One more problem that we have is just a short season. I mean, for us, the daffodils are just blooming. It's really bad. Our trees haven't leafed out. It's been a long, cold spring. And so, and then, our last frost can be the end of May, and our first frost can be the first week of September. So it's a terribly short season. Obviously, there's different ways to help remedy that. We can have raised beds that help heat up a little sooner. We have row covers, different types of plastic, tunnels. I have a really large greenhouse. I do most of my stuff in the greenhouse. Uh, Everything tender, watermelons, cantaloupe, because I don't have enough days to get those things ripe here. All my tomatoes are in there, pumpkins. But if you don't have those, you can make your own. I make my own row covers. You just go get a nice thick enough wire that you can bend it yourself, but not too thick that you can't bend it. And you just make little hoops, and I put like a little a bend at the end, and then you can cover it with whatever you want. A lot of people use plastic. Some people use frost cloth. If I just have a couple plants and I know it's going to get cold, I put a 5-gallon bucket over them. And then sometimes I put a blanket over that if it's really cold. And what I usually tell people is, if you're standing outside naked, would you like to be wrapped in plastic? Would you like to be wrapped in frost cloth? Or would you like to be wrapped in a quilt? So for me, I often will just go out and throw a quilt over my plants when it starts to get cold. Because, there's things that help them keep warm a lot better than just a piece of plastic, which is really only good for about 3 or 4 degrees. Frost cloth also 3 to 5 degrees, depending on how thick your frost cloth is. But you throw a quilt over there and they're going to stay toasty, especially if you have a good structure support underneath it, hoops, or like I said, a 5-gallon bucket. You can even use an old planter pot. I do that too. I save those large planter pots, and I can throw those over, especially just my tomatoes when they're smaller. I can throw those over there and then throw a blanket on top of it. So there's lots of different tricks. And a lot of times you can put them in, and that's just basically to save them from an especially cold night. Otherwise, if you can do a greenhouse, I highly recommend it. It is our happy place. We go out there for coffee. We go out for a happy hour. My kids did most of their schooling in the greenhouse with table and chairs. And if you're interested, call me, because there's also a lot of pitfalls. I had this winter, we got 2 feet of snow overnight. And I know at least 5 people that lost their greenhouses. So you definitely would like to have really good supports, and then a twin wall 8mm polycarbonate is the way to go. So I know you guys get snow, not as much as we do like overnight usually, but definitely you want something that's sturdy for winds and snow loads. And like I said, if you need to, go ahead and contact me on that one. As far as, and then I was just going to get into briefly, those are most of the obstacles that we face. My recommendations as far as what I like to grow, what's just stores really well, what's easy, what my family loves. I grew eggplant one year, beautiful. They were absolutely gorgeous. Japanese, regular, all different colors, speckled, striped. Nobody would touch a single eggplant. So I had to give them all away. So you have to grow things that you like and your family likes. Otherwise, you might be the only person eating eggplant for a long time. First and foremost on my list is something called Zucchino rampicante. And I know it sounds strange, but it's an Italian zucchini. It's also called trombosino. It's Baker Creek Heirloom is kind of my go-to for seeds. And it's a beautiful squash that when it's young, is eaten like a zucchini fresh. It's a little bit firmer than a zucchini, but it is a zucchini. But then as it gets older, it forms this really long squash that I still have one. Actually, we just ate our last one. They will store from September until May. One of the most, and they're extremely versatile. They get a beautiful orange flesh when they're mature. And like I said, it's the longest storing squash that I have, and delicious fresh. You can eat the flowers, you can stuff them. They're a vine, so they need a place to grow, that, some sort of trellis. But if I had one vegetable to grow, that would be it. And then, in the winters, we do squash for almost everything. It's, as far as like survival, it has a lot of calories, compared to kale and some of the other vegetables, which are important too, but it has calories, which is really good. And it's very versatile. You can make pies with it. You can, roast it. You can do all sorts of wonderful things. But when the zucchini are young, you can even slice them and dry them. So, and they make nice chips. That's my first go-to. As far as other things that, if I only had one item that I would grow, it would be strawberries. Super versatile. I can them for jam. I freeze them. I slice them with an egg slicer and I dry them, and they are just fabulous. All winter long, we can have dried strawberries, canned jam, and then also we have frozen strawberries, and we eat them all year long, just by growing a ton of them. I like the June bearing. I have both. But June berry gives you this really nice big crop all at once so that you can just process and process and process. And then, you can set aside some really nice ever-bearing and just have a good little crop all summer. My other favorite is either lemon cucumber or the Japanese, any of the Japanese or Chinese cucumbers, because they don't get bitter. And I don't like bitter cucumbers. And so lemon cucumbers, round, they look like lemons. Again, they're an heirloom variety, so you can save the seeds. Same with the zucchino rampicante. Anything heirloom, you get to save your seeds year to year, and that's what you absolutely want if you're looking to, one, save money, and then two, if you're ever thinking survival situation, you need to know that whatever you planted is what you're going to get the following year. There's an Armenian cucumber, which I also really love. It's not a cucumber, so it never gets bitter. It's actually a muskmelon, but it's really lovely. You eat it and it tastes just like a cucumber. In fact, I didn't even know that until recently. So it's a muskmelon, but again, a never bitter cucumber, easy to grow. For us, the sun gold tomato is one of my favorites because it produces, they're cherry tomatoes. If you have a short season, cherry tomatoes are the way to go. Up here, that's pretty much all we can do outside is gold, and they're very sweet, small yellow tomato that's just delicious. Another one is the baby butternut squash. Really, again, the smaller the squash, sometimes the easier, because if you have a short season, you can get it to mature. But the baby butternuts, they last a long time. Great storage, super sweet. Really delicious. Potatoes. So we do a lot of potatoes. I love fingerling potatoes because they're super fast and you can just grow a ton of them. Pretty much a noxious weed though, because you'll never get them all out and then they just keep reproducing. So you have to be careful where you put those. Yedicule lettuce, and it's Yedikule. Originally from Istanbul, 1500-year-old lettuce. It's very oily. They say you really don't even need dressing for it, just put a little lemon on it. It's a beautiful lettuce, very cold hardy, can take, even a frost. So, and it doesn't bolt particularly fast. So it's a good lettuce for spring. So anyway, that is about all that I have as far as what I wanted to give to you. So I guess, are there any questions, Steve?
I do.
Okay.
I have about 100 of them, but
Okay.
So straw mulch.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Straw mulch that you mentioned a couple of times. Is that pretty much commercially available? I haven't seen straw
Everywhere.
mulch.
Yeah. Any farm store has straw. It's just straw. So a bale. So you buy a bale of straw. If you were to buy it now and put it on your garden, it would be totally fine. It would work and it would be fluffy and lovely. But
Hello,
it will go to seed.
what's going on?
Richard, could you please mute yourself? Thank you.
Anyway, it will go to seed, so you'll get tiny oat plants, but you can just pull them out really easily. Ideally, you buy the straw, like I said, in the fall, just a big bale of it, and you let it sit there, and it'll just get wet and soppy and, not all that lovely. But then when you put it down, it's kind of half broken down. And this also then eventually amends the soil a little bit, puts more organic matter in. But once it's wet and a little bit broken down, it makes a really thick mat that you don't have the weed problem, and it holds the moisture in. And it's in a feed or farm store you can usually find. And they can make it from wheat straw or oat straw. I've seen both of those. Up here it's oat straw.
Does it have the consistency of like animal manure compost?
No, it's just like hay.
Oh,
So it's kind of like hay, except for hay is grass.
right.
And this is it's the shaft at the bottom. So
Does it actually compost down though and become like a mulch?
Not. I mean, it eventually just works into the soil, and it won't, like, if you just let it be, it's not going to break down and look like manure.
Okay.
But it will work down in the soil.
Could I ask one more question, and then it will be everybody else? It should be everybody else's turn anyway. What is your feeling about using raw animal manure of any kind? Chicken, turkey, beef?
I definitely have something to say about that. I can't tell you how many people I know. It's like, oh, I got this load of free horse manure from my friend. Oh, I got this load of free cow manure from friends. Oh, chicken manure. Yes. Anything that does not poop in a pellet is going to have weed seeds in it. Whenever I've used my chicken, no matter how long I thought I let it break down, I ended up just sowing seeds all over my garden. Now, if something poops in a pellet, it's a complete digester. That would be rabbit, goats, sheep, alpaca, deer. Don't use deer poop, but anything that poops in that pellet, you're not going to get the weed seeds. It's like digested completely. And so that is safe to put. It's also not hot. Like if you used pig, cow, horse manure, sometimes it can burn your plants. It's hot. But things that poop in a pellet, you can just broadcast that in your garden if you'd like. So you have, if you are willing to really work, you can use your chicken manure or your cow or your horse or whatever else. But you're really going to have to let it sit for a long time and make sure that all the weeds that have been in there have already sprouted, and that it's gotten really hot and killed any. You have the other problem, though, is that we usually give horses salt. They have salt licks. And so a lot of times if you're using horse manure time and time again, you're going to keep adding little bits of salt to your garden. And it will eventually get to the point where it won't grow. So that can be a problem. The second problem is, depending on where you buy your hay, if you have horses or cows, and you buy your hay from someone who has sprayed their hay fields, which most people do, to prevent weeds, now that horse or cow manure has those herbicides in it, and they will kill your entire garden. I've had people use horse or cow manure they got, and their plants were just deformed or didn't even sprout at all.
There's
So
one question popped up from, let's see, Kevin and Nikki said, and then I have a comment that Karen should mention or discuss a little further. But Kevin and Nikki asked, you mentioned acidic soil for blueberries.
sulfur.
What is needed to amend that?
Yeah, you can use sulfur. They do make special acidifying fertilizer. It'll say like rhododendron fertilizer or hydrangea. But the acid lovers, it's usually sulfur. But it might be best, depending on how familiar you are with that. You can just buy acid loving fertilizer. Or pine needles is a really great one. Wood ash is the opposite of acid. It's to alkalize your soil. So when I make my own potting soil, I use a lot of peat. I just use, probably 2/3 peat, 1/3 compost. I add in a bunch of mycorrhizal fungi. I haven't mentioned that. We'll get to that one in a second. But and then I add in wood ashes because that actually combats the acid. But if you mulch your blueberries with pine needles, that helps give them a little bit more acid that they like. Especially for me, because again, my water is really alkaline. But wood ashes are good. You just have to be careful because they will definitely raise the pH. So, my husband reminded me. If you buy compost, if you buy soil, for instance, around here they sell soil. It's a garden mix. It happens to be that in that garden mix they use compost. Well, it just so happens that compost is a product that's south of Coeur d'Alene here, where they source all of the biosolids from the water treatment plant. So it's basically human manure. And they will say it's organic, and arsenic is organic. And there's a lot of things that are organic, but you have to be really careful because it'll say natural, organic, compost, and sometimes you have to trace it down, and you have to say, they'll say, well, there's biosolids. Well, what's a biosolid? So then you have to go say, well, where's this sourced, and follow it back. So
and one thing to keep in mind when you use human manure in your garden, you're potentially bringing in the pharmaceuticals that people consume on a regular basis and putting that into your garden, which your plants take up. And then eventually you're consuming the pharmaceuticals that people have been taking.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of human manure in my garden. It's fine on your lawn, but I don't recommend it for anything that you want to eat. But
do you use Epsom salt?
I'm organic. Epsom salts are great. Magnesium sulfate. So those are two really key ingredients that plants need, is magnesium and sulfate. So Epsom salts are both of those in a one-shot deal. So those are great to add into your compost or just add to your soil. When I make my garden soil, I add in Epsom salts, bone meal, coffee grounds, wood ashes. I will just get as much stuff as I can, and I put it all in there. If I have old vitamins I don't use anymore, like a multivitamin, I toss those in there. I add like a lot of trace minerals. I basically, my soil gets well fed. So
how often should one rototill the soil?
So rototilling, that's another question on here. I would never rototill around my fruit trees because the roots go out as far as the canopy. So, and they're very shallow. And so those are all of your feeder roots on the edges there. And that's what gives all the nutrients and water for your plant. So if you till that, you're just going to be injuring all of the roots on your trees. I would compost them instead. Like if you have weeds, you can lay down
eggshells, dried and smashed.
Fabric. Yeah, I'll get there. You can lay down fabric, cardboard, mulches, all sorts of things to help suppress the weeds around your fruit trees. But you just want to be careful not to disturb the soil too much around there. Eggshells are great, dried and smashed. They help prevent, especially if you have slugs. They're really good for slugs. Sluggo is also safe. One thing to look for if you're concerned about chemicals is the OMRI. It's an organic materials. It just, if you see those little words OMRI, it just means that it is organic, and they don't have that on anything that has human manure. So human manure is not considered safe for the OMRI registration. So So as far as the rototilling, wait, I hear it says, I did last January, my trees are exploding. Okay, for the rototilling, you could, okay, so that's also called root pruning. So if you were to rototill around your trees, there is a chance that you're basically doing a root prune, and where you're cutting back one root, it might branch out and make multiple roots. So in some cases, that could be a very good thing, but in general, it's not recommended. So it might be, there's a lot. Okay, gardening is like the Ford, Chevy, Dodge. Every gardener has a different, one person's just absolutely die hard one way, and then other people disagree and they have different opinions. I say go with whatever works for you. I love permaculture, um, but some people like victory gardens with nice straight rows and, all one thing down each row. You have to find what works for you, and, find something that works in your garden too, because every garden is absolutely different.
Your experience mixing vegetable plants together.
So that's mixing vegetable plants would be companion planting, and I highly recommend that. For instance, if you have brassicas, cabbages, broccoli, those kind of things, if you interplant dill, supposedly that helps the cabbage butterflies not smell the brassicas and not eat them. Companion planting could mean that, like, the three sisters you may have heard of is the squash, beans, and corn, and each one had a different function. The corn is a heavy nitrogen feeder, and the beans fix nitrogen in the soil and feed the corn. And then the squash also is a heavy nitrogen feeder, so the beans help that. But then it's spread out on the ground and helped prevent weeds and kept moisture in the soil. So each one had these like little functions. And this is something the Indians did, the three sisters. But these are things that we learn that we can do in our garden. So there are many books on companion planting, and you can just research that and find different things that work for you based on what you enjoy. But sometimes you can plant different flowers or herbs or things that are called trap crops. And so there's something, the aphids may enjoy a certain vegetable, but they enjoy this one herb even more. Or like nasturtiums are a trap crop. So if you plant nasturtiums, they attract the aphids, and then eventually they leave your plants alone, but they're eating your nasturtiums. So there's all types of purposes for companion plants. Yeah. So there's a comment, Jacob's allegory of the olive tree has servants digging around the trees to nurse them. And that absolutely, like I said, can happen. But you can also damage a young tree. So it depends the size of the tree, how deep you go, how far in you go. You can always try it, but just be aware of it.
Hey, Karen.
Yes.
Earlier, Donald Danner asked a question on the chat line about using human hair from a barber to keep pests, deer, rabbits, whatever, gophers away.
Yes, I love that. I do that all the time. I have a problem with deer outside of my fenced area, and I absolutely just pull it out of my brush. If you can get it from a barber, even better. And the longer the hair and the more it can like dangle on the plants, the better, because it's the texture of it. They don't like to eat the hair. So if it's sprinkled on the ground, it might not be as effective as if you drape it over, which is what I do. So I sort of just drape it around my plants, just on the ones that they're absolutely devouring. So that works. And as far as corn has a tendency to fall over. So when you plant corn, you definitely need to plant, their roots are like fingers, and they need to be interconnected. So if you can plant them in patches and batches, like you don't want to plant a row. because a wind will come along and just blow them all over. So if you can plant like at least 4, or 6 or 8 in groups and clumps, they work better. And, at least a foot apart is ideal. So, and I really like putting edible flowers in my garden. I like to mix a lot of different things. I find that everything does better because they all have something to offer. And then my garden is my happy place. If it's beautiful, you're going to want to be there. If it's, all work and no fun, you're not going to want to be there.
How
So.
do you water clumps of corn?
I water everything mostly by hand or drip. Sometimes sprinkler, just depends. I'm putting in irrigation systems this year because otherwise I spend almost my entire summer watering. But this year, because it was a new house, so we just never had anything in there. But you can water corn with a sprinkler, or you can water it with a drip system. So, anyway. Did I get them all?
I think
Are you
so.
watching? Okay.
Yeah.
Any other?
I have a question about fire blight,
Oh,
particularly on my pear trees, my Bartlett pear in particular. Are there some natural remedies for fire blight on pear trees?
so technically that was one of the questions in our Master Gardener program, and the official answer is you should just remove the tree. Because it's something if it's a really light case, you might have success with a super hard prune. Neem oil, I forgot to mention neem oil is also one of my real go-tos. It is it's OMRI, it's from a neem seed. It can be used as an ovicide, insecticide, fungicide, but viruses are something. If you ever get plant viruses, you can't treat those. So those you have to rip out the plant and throw them away. Certain blights, depends on what kind it is, but like funguses can often be treated with less watering, more sun, a hard prune, copper, sulfur. There's different things that can help, but a lot of times it's just a sign that there's something else wrong, like too much water, or it's just like a virus that it'll never get rid of. In which case, usually you should remove it. But like I said, you can try a really hard prune too. Just anywhere you see the fire blight, just cut that off and try. If you want to save it. How big is it?
This is the 3rd year for
Okay.
this little tree.
And that
It's had fire blight both years, and I did that. I went around and just took off what was blighted.
yeah, the technical, like official, handbook says just remove it and try another variety, a more resistant variety. It's not my favorite, but yeah.
Darn.
I know, right? Well, I mean, like biblically, you're not really supposed to eat fruit of the tree for 3 years anyway. So technically you're supposed to pick the fruits off, even from just a gardener standpoint. You're supposed to pull the fruits off for the first couple of years, which is really funny because in the Bible it does say to wait 3 years. So I guess that's just happens to work out. Anyway, I'm reading on the companion planting with tomatoes. Carrots are what's sort of recommended with tomatoes, but you can put in basil. So I prune my tomatoes to a single stem because I don't like tomato bushes, because somehow you can never get into the middle to get those tomatoes out. So I prune my tomatoes to follow just one stem. I tie them to the ceiling of my greenhouse, but you can use stakes or, you know, make some type of trellis for them. But if you prune them to one stalk in the middle and you pull out the little suckers as they go, they'll still produce a ton of tomatoes. But one, they don't get as many diseases because you have more light and air that gets to them. And then underneath them and around them, you can plant carrots because carrots and tomatoes are friends. So they're a good companion plant. And the carrots don't need, they don't need as much sun. They do well with sun, but they can handle just a little bit of shade from those tomatoes. So they do really well. And also, I plant my carrots towards the end of the season, the end of the summer. And then that way they're still producing. Once my tomatoes die from frost, my carrots are still growing. And then I just leave them in the ground and I eat them all winter. So.
Another question I was just typing, how do you deal with strawberry pests, snails? And copper is a metal that is used to eradicate snails. Also Sluggo?
Yeah, Sluggo is the best. It's OMRI. It's totally safe with pets and animals, and it works fabulously for snails and slugs. It's in little pellets. You can buy it on Amazon or Home Depot or wherever, and you just broadcast it around, and they do that. Slug traps are fun. I mean, I take beer, it's disgusting, and I pour it in like little tuna fish cans and make little slug traps, and it's super rewarding to see them all die in there. But Sluggo works great.
They love beer.
They love beer.
So do I, actually.
And if you don't drink beer and you don't have beer, you can always use yeast. You put a little bit of yeast and a little sugar and water and make little traps, but bad beer is good. So cheap, bad beer. Anyway. So
I think that's it.
Is that it? I don't see any more questions.
Karen, how about tilling your garden every year?
So I'm a no-till person, and again, this is the Ford Chevy Dodge. I always till like the first year I turn over all my soil, at least the first year I've ever planted something like it. You dig out all of the grass or, when you're starting, and then I till in, I turn over with a shovel basically, and add in compost and nutrients in my soil. But I don't do it after that. Because if you have really healthy soil, you're going to have all these little earthworms. I have a ton of earthworms in my soil. And so I want them to create those little tunnels and they aerate the soil. And so they're providing nutrients and air in your soil. When you till it, it has a tendency to compact back down. So tilling somehow makes it more compacted in the end. Whereas if you don't till it, as long as you're not running like heavy equipment over it. If you have something where you're just, you're driving over it heavy equipment, yeah, then you're going to need to, add organic matter and things in your soil. But once you have that, in fact, I don't even often pull up my plants. I'll just cut them off at the soil level and let those roots decompose and provide more nutrients for the worms. And again, that adds just more organic matter that holds nutrients, provides or holds moisture, provides nutrients as it breaks down, and then just gives that a fluffier texture. So, but there are people that till every year, and that's totally fine too. I'm just maybe lazy too. So that
Potting soil recipe.
Yeah. Potting soil recipe. So I usually have about 2/3 peat moss, 1/3 compost. You could, maybe even up the compost a little bit. Then yes, depending on the amount, you don't add a lot of wood ash. So if I buy 1 bale of peat, that would probably be at least 2 to 3 bags of compost for that 1 bale. And then for that amount, maybe 1 cup of wood ash, and then bone meal, definitely like 2 or 3 cups of bone meal for something that size. I mix it up in a huge wheelbarrow or in giant totes. And then mycorrhizal fungi, I said I was going to talk about that. I add that to everything I do. Mycorrhizal fungi is a fungus that attaches to the root tips and the roots, not just the tips, but anywhere in the roots. And so it actually takes what these would be roots and just adds tons of extra roots. And it helps absorb nutrients, it helps absorb water, it makes a much stronger plant. And they've actually found that these strands of fungi help plants communicate one to another, and then they can actually transfer nutrients. It's sort of like an internet for plants. So I add it to all my potting soil so that all my little plants get it from the minute they send roots down. I put it in my garden. I put it in my raised beds. I put it when I plant trees. It's like magical for plants, and you can buy it. It's online. I get it online by the bag. It doesn't take much, like a tablespoon or a teaspoon, with each tree that I plant, but it's one of those things that just helps really feed your soil. When you see it in the soil, it's kind of like this white strands of fungus, and it's, again, one of those things that's really good for your soil, and you shouldn't need to till it if you have all that. Evan's fielding these things for me. Mosaic virus, yeah. Did that work? Oh, that's awesome. So somebody said on here that they put the colloidal silver for the mosaic virus. That's awesome. Wow, I will have to try that. It's funny. I've taken the Master Gardener class a couple times because I teach it too, and I learn things every time. I mean, however long you've gardened, there's still these awesome things that people are just ingenious coming up with solutions. So I love that. I'll have to try the silver in the garden. The other thing I'm going to say about these things, viruses are tough. I mean, you could try colloidal silver on your fire blight. It certainly can't hurt. It's just, historically, it's much harder to kill viruses in plants. But be very careful where you buy things. Especially if you have a greenhouse, because once you import something in there, it's really hard to get rid of. If you can, but do everything from seed as much as possible. If you have to buy things, just make sure it's a very reputable place. Inspect the plants really well, because if you buy them and they have diseases, so much harder to get rid of. So, there's no way to get the salt out. I mean, a little salt is not bad. I mean, the plants actually need a tiny amount of salt. There are certain plants that will take up salt. You can just research that. I don't know them off the top of my head. I think they're lettuces, and they happen to pull salt out of the ground. And I've heard people reclaim by using certain types of greens, and you can plant them and they'll help pull salt out of the ground. We might have Evan do a little research on that one. But the greenhouses, farm tech, but there's another one from, and I will, if anybody's interested, contact me, because I just had somebody buy a greenhouse out of Canada, and it's fantastic. It's kind of ugly, but it's has an incredible snow load. So in fact, the best greenhouse there is the dome, which I don't find particularly like my favorite design, but they have the best snow load, best wind resistance. Second to that is anything that's just a half circle, so that you really, or a Gothic arch, so that it rolls off the sides. That was my last, you saw that greenhouse. That one was great. The one I have now has straight roof and then straight sides, and all of the snow hangs on that edge. It's not a great design. I don't recommend that one. Anyway, it's tricky. So, beets. Okay, there you go.
Bigger.
You can try. Yeah, they said beets help remove the salt from the soil. So you can kind of use that as trap crop, basically trapping out the salt. So I don't use a manure. I use composted vegetables. The compost that I get, there's one called Cedar Grove organic compost. They sell it at Home Depot. And that's a great compost. It is only yard waste. I've not had a problem with it ever. I've used it routinely. There are other places. Up here, we have a product called BT Green, Bartek Green, and it's municipal plant waste. And that's what I use. Manures, there is a risk of E. coli and a few other things from using manures. So you do have to be kind of careful with that. But plant waste, generally, I've never had a problem with. And that's kind of my go-to. I have used steer manure before in an emergency or, for things I don't eat. But yeah, you use what you have. That's people have been gardening since the beginning of time, and the poorest people in the world are usually gardeners. And so you just have to be creative and use what you have available to use. So. And sometimes that's manure. So you just do your best.
Karen,
Yes.
could you, if you don't mind me jumping in front of everybody, could you talk about the benefits and the difference between growing like cucumbers and beans and squashes vertically on like a trellis or some kind of support system versus letting your cucumbers run on the ground and your beans, not supported and allowing them to go vertical? Do you get better production by going vertical?
Well, vertical is a really great idea if you're short on space. So, but one thing I see people do is they cram too much in one space. So let's say I have a box and I've got this really nice row of pole beans and I've got them growing up. And then I have squash that I put in and that goes down low. And each plant, though, needs enough space for its root system. So you have to be careful. This square foot gardening and people try to cram a ton of stuff in a very small box. That works if you're putting a lot of nutrients and a lot of water into that. But, every plant needs to have a space for its roots. So vertical gardening is also really good if you have a lot of pests because you get air and light when it's up higher. So if you have problems with powdery mildew, which most people do, especially towards the end of the season, if you can get it vertical on trellises, then, it also adds visual interest to the garden, which is really important because we want our gardens also to be productive, but also look nice. Almost every year since my kids were little, and now they don't care, but I still do it, is I make green bean teepees. So I just cut branches from the woods, or I use old corn stalks and I tie them all together and make a teepee, and then I do pole beans up the teepee. And it's a great way to pick because you don't have to lean over, which is fun. And then it looks fun and it's beautiful. And, there's lots of cattle panels are another one.
What is it?
Or hog panels, cattle panels. I use those. I use tea stakes, and then I put a cattle panel, and I can vine and trellis all my squash. Sometimes I arch them in a box, and then you can grow cucumbers and melons over the arch, and then put all your basil and your lettuces underneath because they enjoy just having that shade and that protection that some of those vines. So it's just a matter of getting creative. And then maximizing your growing space. That's what vertical does. Air, light, things like that. So, yeah, I was just saying, Evan, definitely want to pray over your stuff. So we do, when you plant them, a lot of times just say a prayer. But usually what happens when you do that is God will remind you at 11 o'clock at night that you forgot to cover something and it's going to freeze. So then you're traipsing out in your jammies with a blanket. So anyway.
Any other questions?
Yeah. And if you do, again, I have a website. It's kind of like I'm a gardener, so I'm all my time in the garden and no time posting anything. But there's more information, some of the stuff I talked about and some other stuff. So it's called betweenthefrosts.com. Want to type. There are some, articles in greenhouses and plant nutrition and things on there too. And then you can also reach me there, like email me. My email's there, so if you need it.
Alan has a question.
Oh, how would you do? So I don't know if you guys know what cattle panels are, but they're like the metal panels. I'll have Evan send it really quickly. They are super, super strong. And if you use them, either you can arch them, which is, you need two people, and fit them inside a box, which I do, or you can just use T-stakes and create, like a wall of trellis. They're super heavy. I mean, you can nigh on stand on it, so it's really heavy. It will take your heaviest melons and cantaloupe and things like that. And if you need to support them, usually the vine will support them and they'll drop off when they're ripe. Some people support them with like pantyhose and stuff like that, but you can make a little net, a sling for them, and then tie them to the trellis. But normally they'll support themselves. So, but the cattle panels are awesome. You just need really big bolt cutters to cut them to size. If you have to cut them. So, any more? All right.
I guess that's it.
And like I said, if anybody has any more questions, then I have some answers. There's like a million different, again, there's a lot of different solutions for problems and a lot of different methods. And you just have to find something that works and ask your neighbors, especially. I mean, one of the recommendations from one of my students once is just look around and see what grows, see what your neighbors are doing. We do tours and it's called the I Tried, but it died. And, no matter how hard you try, some of the best lessons are, when we walk around and look at each other's gardens and people will say, oh, this died or that died, or I did this and I did that, and just learn from each other, especially people that are in your same climate. So you can just learn so much by doing garden tours for each other. Can make it a fun happy hour event, and just go around and get ideas, because I have never thought of using silver, but that's awesome. I'm going to totally put that in my repertoire. So anyway, Yedicule. Will you write that one down here? Right here, second one. So Baker Creek Heirloom, which I think, rareseeds.com, Evan put it on there on the chat, has fabulous heirloom stuff. Always read the reviews. They'll give you this great description. You're like, I totally want that. And you go to reviews and people are like, yeah, it didn't sprout very well, or this happened. So I always read the reviews first and then decide then whether it's something I truly want. So anyway, that's it. I'm good.
If I could,
Sure.
I know that my fruit trees are 32 years old because we planted them right before my daughter, who's 32 years old, was born. And I'm in Vegas, and we've got some rather interesting things down here. But about 3 years ago, a couple of my trees died. And then the next year, a couple more died. And then last year, the Pièce de la Resistance, the very best peach tree that anybody could ever hope for, sweet, wonderful fruit, that one died on me.
Oh
So
no.
what I did is this last January, I rented a rototiller from Ahern, and it wasn't cheap. And I went around and I rototiller and of course these are older trees again.
Right.
And I did that, and 2 trees that I thought were dead are now alive, and they're sprouting branches like crazy. And just about every single tree that we did that to is just exploding. Now I did have to transplant. I needed to plant 6 new trees this last February as a result. But I just wanted to do that. Denver did this thing about if you have a tree and you're not digging around it and so on and so forth. And so when my tree started dying, I thought, well, I need to do that. And then I put it off and put it off. But when that one peach tree died, I was done. I'm going to save what I can. And so just to let you know, that's what works for me down
And
here.
that's a great, that would especially be helpful for old trees because you're essentially doing what's called a root prune. Just as you would prune the top, the roots aren't getting pruned. And that would be, obviously that was very successful. And I'll keep that also in my little repertoire, especially for older trees. I think it'd only really be a problem like rototilling if you had younger trees because, they don't have that established root system like the older ones do, where a prune would be really handy, for them. So that's a good idea.
I was particularly perturbed when I lost my favorite peach tree.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
bet. We can't even grow peaches up here, so I'm jealous. So.
Hey, well, thank you guys so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been an amazing presentation, and that's cool. So,
Thank you.
do you have anyone who would volunteer to close with a prayer? If not, I can go ahead and offer a prayer here.
I can do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Our Heavenly Father, tonight as we have been edified, we express our gratitude to Thee for the opportunity to come together, and grateful that Karen has shared the knowledge that she has with us to be able to be a benefit for each one of us as we strive to gain more information. We pray for Thy direction as we prepare for the conference in September. Bless us each individually to be inspired what is necessary to prepare our families for the times that are coming. Help us to go forward with energy and strength, seeking to receive Thy direction and guidance in all we do. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 One last question for Karen, if it's okay. Will you please come back again?
Sure.
That'd
be fun. I love to see people's gardens. So if we come down there, I would love to take some tours.
Kevin, Karen, and Evan Bennett.
If you guys were ever to come to my garden, it'd be in the category of I tried, but it died. So I look forward to trying new things to try and get out of that. So
gardening is the best hobby ever because you can completely fail and start fresh the next year.
That's true.
It's very forgiving. Every year's a new year.
That's true. I'll try and keep that in mind as I'm frustrated. So thank you.
Good night, everyone.